Hello and welcome to the after party. We are the Great Order and No White Guilt. And before doing anything else, we're going to read a super chat that has come in by way of the familiar alternative. And you can find it, of course, by digging down into the description. A munificent super chat by our dear friend Roy Danton, super chatting with $100 and writing, just watched yesterday's Going Free, and it was such a powerful message. It is so hard not to get frustrated in a world where people are so afraid of talking about this at work, knowing that it only takes one single anti-white to report them to HR. Thank you most dearly, Roy, for that generous super chat. Now, appearing on the honors roll call today are a host of names, and we start with Andrew, Laura, Bob, the good girl, our very own Dainty Brighton, Daniel, David, Fiona, Inquipper, Jason, Jay, John G. and John N., Johnny, Joshua, Judson, Keishi, Evelyn, Wayne, Scott, and Gerald. During this period of increasing anti-white censorship from payment processors and social media platforms, your commitment to white well-being and your willingness to act on those convictions demonstrates the noblest qualities of character. I salute you all. If you appreciate what I'm doing for white well-being, please consider becoming a monthly investor. The more you invest, the less time I have to spend at my day job, the more I can do for white well-being, which includes hardening my positions on payment processors and social media platforms to prevent the anti-whites from silencing this powerful message of white well-being. And if you all, like Roy, listened to the Going Free episode yesterday, you will have learned that several days ago now that Venmo froze my account. It's a payment processor, and froze the money that is in that account. But I am in the process of thawing the account and getting the money out of it. There's little doubt on whose head the Super Chat crown gleams this week. It is the beneficent Quebec for investing $250. Congratulations and bravo cubed, my dear friend. In second place was our dear friend Luke, investing $30. Congratulations and thank you as well. Super chat on YouTube, or take the fireman's pole down into the video's description for a familiar alternative. Jared and I evenly share the super chats with our guests here on the after party. And when I said fireman's pole, I was not referring to an adult movie. Today we are going to get tapped into Laura Towler from Defend Europa and the YouTube channel bearing her name, where she makes short videos about current events. Laura is a nationalist from Yorkshire in the verdant north of England. She is an editor and writer at Defend Europa, where they report news and opinion from across Europe and from a nationalist perspective. Laura has also written for other publications, including Countercurrents and the Iconoclast magazine, with quill and ink bottle in hand. Laura Towler.
Well, we have a funny chat. I just want to say from Fui Gebhardt one. I don't know if that's how you say it. Do I get a tote bag if I donate? Jason, maybe we should design after party tote bags, kind of like they did on PBS when they did the fundraising drives.
Right. Well, maybe
it would be funny. I don't know. I don't know if there's a demand for that from our audience. Tote bags. We could see. But yes, we are joined again by Laura Towler today, who has been on the show a couple of times. And Laura, it's always great to talk to you. And you've been busy. You've been very busy since the last time we spoke. Of course, you helped us celebrate our birthday back in February when we had a bunch of people come on with quick spots. But the last time we had you on, and it was an episode with just you on the after party, was back in early November. So it was a little while ago at this point, and a lot has happened since then. And we definitely want to use this partially as a little report on what is going on in the UK and the wider Anglophone world, connect that to some things that are recently going on here in the US. As Jason said, he did his own solo stream, going free stream yesterday, partially influenced by the recent Senate hearings here in the United States. Some very interesting things going on. So why don't we begin by catching up on Brexit and talking a little about that. It seems like everything with this, it keeps showing us that the can is getting kicked further and further down the road. There was supposed to be some kind of a deal at the end of March, and now that's not happening. But why don't you begin to set the table for us with that, and send us your greetings from the UK, our cousins across the pond.
Yeah, hiya guys. I hope you're both well, and hello to everybody in the audience. I've actually been on this show 5 times now, so I hope everybody's not getting sick of my of my voice.
She's going for a record.
Sometimes I get sick of hearing my voice, but never mind. So yeah, Brexit. Well, I really wish that I had something to report, and I really wish that I could give you some kind of original spin or some witty feedback about it. But the truth is that nothing's happening. So we were supposed to leave the European Union at the end of March, but they couldn't decide on a deal, so it got extended to April, and now it's been extended again to Halloween, the 31st of October, and they're just making such a mess of it. So Theresa May, who's very weak, she's our Prime Minister obviously and leader of the Conservative Party, she keeps going to the EU and coming up with these deals that are just absolutely rubbish. So they're not Brexit at all, it's basically staying in, but called Brexit. And in some situations, it's actually worse than Brexit because we still have to follow the laws of the EU, but we're not allowed to vote on stuff ourselves. So she's coming back with these rubbish deals, and Parliament are quite rightly turning them down. And then she's going back and getting another deal and coming back, and they're turning that down as well. But everything that she puts in front of them, whether it's her deal or a no-deal Brexit or a second referendum, Parliament just decline it. And then the Speaker, I don't know if you've seen in the House of Commons, the guy who shouts order, order, he picked 4 deals from other MPs and asked the House of Commons to vote on those 4 deals, and they declined all 4 of those deals as well. So it's just, nothing's happening. It's just absolute rubbish. And I wish I could say that the House of Commons were turning these deals down because they were firm Brexiteers and because they wanted us to leave properly. But they're all just traitors, and they all just want us to stay in because it suits them if we stay in. So that's Brexit. I'm sorry, it's not very interesting, but nothing's happening. We don't know what's going to happen.
Well, we heard all of this news that there was this deadline at the end of March. What was it, the 29th? There was one of the last days of March, right? That they had to reach. That was the day that they were exiting, that they had to reach something. And I don't really understand what the sense of responsibility is, the sense of accountability is, if they're able to just keep delaying it like this. I mean, from what I've been trying to gather and learn about it myself, it does seem as if when David Cameron was in office in 2016, when the original referendum took place, he was expecting it to be this final word where he could kind of once and for all wave off the people who were actually in his own party, the Conservative Party, who were making rumblings about maybe leaving the EU, and squash it once and for all. And no one really thought that this would happen. No one really thought that they would get the public votes. And I'm sure there's, just like in the United States, there's all kinds of frauds and things going on behind the scenes. But somehow, squeaking through, when all the votes were counted, they couldn't arrive at anything other than a leave result, right? And no one was prepared for it. Even the people that wanted it, some would say, weren't really prepared for it, didn't really think that it was going to happen. The extraordinary thing is that it's been over 2.5 years. We're going on 3 years now. It'll be 3 years in June that the public voted for this, and yet nothing really substantial is happening. What do you think about the idea that they're trying to make it a deal where it's with the EU as a bloc, whereas the United Kingdom could just say, well, our people, the will of our people, if things were more straightforward, was to leave the EU, and thus we can begin to deal with each European country on a one-to-one basis, on an individual basis. And I know this is a complex thing. I'm not saying it would happen overnight, but eventually, but the focus should be on trade deals, negotiating deals with each country one-to-one, not this block of the EU. If they really wanted it to happen, which obviously they don't, isn't something like that would be going on? Is that kind of thing discussed in your circles or in the wider, news cycle over there in the UK?
Well, it's probably discussed in our circles, but I don't think it's discussed in the news. I mean, you can probably imagine which politicians are kind of on our side in Europe and which ones aren't. So we have people like Viktor Orban and Salvini that are on our side, and then we have people like Macron and Merkel who aren't and want to make it difficult for us. But it's just, it is 3 years in June, and we're no further forward at all. So we should be planning these trade agreements now with European countries. I mean, we're Great Britain. We're such a fantastic country. We have so much to offer. And they're acting like we're not worthy of being a member and like we have to beg for all these deals and stuff. And I just find it truly pathetic. It's been 3 years and nothing's happening. And I don't know of any trade deals that we've got because it doesn't seem to be a priority. And I think it's like a pantomime. It's all some kind of act where they're, like trying to act like they're not actually betraying the public. But in the end, we all know that we're not going to get a proper Brexit. Absolutely no way. It will either be something like where we're stuck into a customs union and there's still free trade or free movement between certain countries. And they're just delaying it, I think. It's at the point now where a lot of people are just like, just do what you want because we're all sick of it. And I think a lot of the public as well, Morgoth made this point on another stream a few days ago, and it was a very good point. A lot of the public don't actually understand what's going on. They don't understand what deals have been put on the table and what deals have been turned down. They just know that we're being betrayed and the government aren't getting on with it. So, support for the Conservative Party at the moment is just an all-time low. I think the EU have actually agreed to extend the period with the Tories because Theresa May is saying now that she's going to work with Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Labour Party. So they're talking about working together and maybe pushing something through. So that's why the EU have said, yeah, we'll extend it till Halloween. But Jezza were calling for a second referendum not long ago. So yeah, just God knows what's going to happen.
Well, all right. To your point about people not understanding it, let's take it back very simply. What would be the yardsticks, the measuring sticks for you personally, Laura? What would be the results to say, I got what I wanted? This is really the results of the UK truly leaving the EU.
Well, I want to leave with a no deal. So yeah, I just want us to leave and be a sovereign, independent nation, and then work with not just European countries, but countries all over the world to secure our own trade deals. So I just want no deal, but I mean, they seem to think that we'd struggle if we had a no deal, whereas I don't think we would struggle. So a lot of people who are against that option just don't seem to have any faith in Britain at all.
And what about this? The whole reason that it was delayed a couple of weeks ago is there was a member of parliament who she had literally like an ankle bracelet on. She had been in jail for some kind of fraud, and she was the deciding vote, and that's why. And if it weren't for her vote, then there would have just been a no-deal Brexit. Is that my understanding? Could you bring us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so she was in prison for fraud. I don't think she was in for long, but she's got a tag on now. She's a African woman. I think it was something to do with her son, who's a drug dealer or something. I haven't really followed the story, but she was in prison. And they voted to extend it and not go through with a no deal option, which would have had to have happened if they didn't extend it. And it won by one vote, and she was a deciding vote. So a criminal who's on a tag has basically ruined everything, if it could be ruined anymore. But
there's a certain gross symbolism to all of that.
Well, yeah, exactly. But all the votes anyway they've been so close every time. So when she's put deals on the table, it's been very, very split. It's not like it's been, 80%, 20%. But yeah, she stopped it.
But if that MP with the ankle bracelet, the lovely fashionable ankle bracelet, hadn't voted, would that have invoked Article 50, and that is the motion that triggers a country leaving the EU? Is that correct?
Well, it would have, because the vote won by one person, it would have been, I think it would have been 50-50, so I'm not sure what would have happened.
Right.
I'll have to double check that. But yeah, basically she turned up late as well. So she turned up late and went to vote for this thing, and it was like, well, thanks for that. You shouldn't have bothered. But yeah, she's just awful. How is she still a politician? How is a criminal with a tag who's been who's like committed fraud and whose son is a drug dealer, and she defended him? How is she responsible for people in this country? It just blows my mind.
I read something that said that as long as her sentence wasn't a year, that it was under a year, that she was able to maintain her post as an MP. But I mean, there are still people that are, I don't know, I think she's still in hot water, and they're still trying to figure out maybe getting her with something else. But I'm not sure what the law over there in Britain is. I would imagine that if it was a 50-50 split, they would have had to do it again. But at least for now, so she decided it and pushed back to Halloween. You can't write this stuff. It's like something out of a dystopian novel. It sounds too obvious to say, but it's crazy reading this, like seeing these bits of news drip over here. And because for months and months, this March date was built up. And then it's this situation with a criminal MP breaks the tie, and now it's pushed back to Halloween.
Yeah, we must look so incompetent to other countries, but the public are seething about it, and we just can't do anything about it because we've got this democracy and this absolutely useful House of Commons full of traitors and people who just look out for themselves, and we're all stood here like fuming about it. 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit, and they're just making such a mess of it, and it's embarrassing, to be honest. We must look so incompetent to other countries, but like what can we actually do apart from rioting? Well, I don't know.
I mean, in these circles, and I think you'd agree, knowing what we know, it's not really incompetence, maybe to other people more mainstream, that it's really more another example of revealing the hand of what is going on, that the powers that be behind the scenes don't want these kinds of things to happen, don't want national sovereignty, certainly don't want any whiff of a confident European populace asserting itself, right? So that is really what's going on. Now, you said a few moments ago, quoting Morgoth, that people are confused and some people are just kind of throwing their hands up in the air, which is a bit of a scary prospect because it's like training an animal, right? It's breaking its spirit. At some point, you know that the animal is kind of given up and it's not going to resist you anymore. On the flip side of that, is there any indication that this is, to the anger you were just speaking to, that this is galvanizing people, that this is waking even more people up, or this is consolidating some kind of a new right-wing nationalist movement over there?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, like I said, I think that faith in the Conservative Party is just at an all-time low. But then I hope that people don't switch to Labour and think that they're a viable option. I mean, the problem that we have over here is we've got UKIP, we've got For Britain, and now we've got the Brexit Party as well. So they're kind of like three pro-Brexit parties, which are splitting the vote between three ways. So yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure what's going to happen there, but like at work, for example, I work in a very middle class city, and in my office, I'm the only person that voted Leave, and everybody else voted Remain. And they talk about it sometimes, but I can tell from listening to them that they don't really know what's going on. They just know that they're being betrayed, or that the winning vote is being betrayed, and they just have a little moan, like saying, "Oh, she's dragging it out again, isn't she?" And I just don't think that a lot of people are following it to that much detail because it's getting so boring now. It really is. It will, in October, it will be about 3.5 years since we voted, and I don't know if they're going to come up with something over the next half a year or not, but what they're going to come up with when the House of Commons just won't accept anything.
Is that the sentiment over there, that the citizenry is convinced that it's incompetence rather than malevolence that is behind this? Or is there more of a sense that there are anti-whites in the regime that are preventing this from happening because it is better for them to remain in control by way of this simple mechanism than by way of multiple mechanisms. Which is it? I mean, it sounds almost like you're saying that a lot of the population is just of the mind that there's just a lot of confusion and it's so complex an endeavor that it can't be sort of cobbled together and made to happen.
Well, I think it's split. I think some people are just very kind of maybe hopeful and naive. But I mean, a lot of people do mention that the EU have called second referendums for many European countries about many different types of votes. So I think a lot of people do know that it's malicious and that Theresa May was a Remainer. So I think a lot of people do know that they actually don't want to leave. And it's just a bit of a charade and a pantomime that they're putting on. But I think some people actually do believe that they're trying and struggling. So I'd say it's kind of split, really.
What about this lawsuit that someone, I don't know who it is, I've just heard about this lawsuit that has been filed that says that the UK has already left the EU based on what was written before because something didn't happen or something wasn't done. Do you know anything about this lawsuit?
No, I don't. But I know that when we did trigger Article 50, we were supposed to have left by the 29th of March. So I don't know if it's referring to that, but I'm not familiar with any lawsuit, sorry.
Well, if anybody in the chat knows of the lawsuit that I'm referring to and the individual who filed it knows any of the details, please speak up in the chat, because I just barely heard some of that the other day, and it's actually quite intriguing. I wonder how that will be stymied, because that will tell us a lot about those who are really in power and what their intentions are. If there is a legitimate case, then you'll see some illegitimate or extra legal steps being taken to stymie the cases moving forward.
So, Laura, you're able to have these conversations at work openly and discuss that you voted leave?
Yeah, well, at my last couple of jobs, I was very, very open about my views, like about immigration and race and everything. But I was working in very kind of working class communities where I could say anything I wanted and it didn't offend anybody. But where I am now, it's very middle class and it's a very, very white city. And I know that they're all kind of liberals and Remainers and lefties and stuff. So I don't talk about politics at work. Sometimes I accidentally slip up and show my power level, but I try not to talk about politics at work. But if they ask me a question, I will answer honestly. So if they ask me something to do with Brexit or immigration, I'm not going to give a crap answer. I mean, there was actually a conversation there about dating outside your race. And I was asked if I fancied somebody. And this has happened a few times in my life. And I was like, no, I'm only interested in white guys. And then that started a conversation about, well, you know, that's racist. And I was just like, well, I don't care. But, you know, things like that. I do answer honestly, but I don't try and like go and enforce my views on everybody, because it's just not the kind of environment where they're going to accept nationalism.
Jason, what's a teachable moment here? What would be the going free way to approach when a young woman is pressured into saying, oh, well, it's racist to date within your own race? I know, of course, your whole paradigm is to not even give legitimacy to the very word racist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, precisely. You don't engage it. You don't defend that you are not racist. You don't defend that you have a preference and you should be allowed a preference and others are allowed a preference. And why aren't you allowed a preference? And this is just what does it for you sexually, physically, is to be attracted to white males as a white woman. No, you just ask why they are so anti-white that they would encourage you to take someone of another race. Put the argument and the onus back on them to defend why you must have interest in these non-white males when you simply do not. And then watch them try to defend that position. Ask them, what do they have against young white couples? What do they have against young white couples and white babies? What's their problem with white couples and white babies? Why do they want to put an end to that? Frame the conversation that way, and you will have won the day. They'll have to either, like in Going Free yesterday, we had a young man by the name of Michael gave his testimony, an absolutely just riveting super chat that he decided to use this lexicon and these dialectics in his class with his professor. And in front of the class, he was able to get his professor to admit that the professor was anti-white. Now, that is an earth-shaking moment in the cause for white well-being, because everyone in that room that witnessed that conversation, including that professor, male or female, saw him or her fall down from this artificially constructed moral high ground of here are all the moral pretexts and ethical pretexts for why we need to arrive at these anti-white conclusions. That individual, that professor, actually had to climb down from that artificially constructed moral pretext and say, no, the bottom line is that I am an anti-white professor, and therefore that is why you're getting the arguments that you are receiving. An extremely powerful moment, and I hope that Michael will continue to share these. This is like the stories that I receive every single day. I receive direct messages and emails from people every single day saying they finally decided to use the lexicon and the dialectic of going free. They finally decided to put the anti-whites back on their heels, and they win every single time. So if you are out there and you haven't done it, if you're a white lady and you have had your friends or colleagues or coworkers, what have you, say to you, oh boy, it is racist to not be attracted to non-white races, you immediately flip it around on them. What do they have against young white couples? Why would they want to put an end to young white families? This is the kind of argument you want to have with these people. And I assure you, in every single case, they will backpedal as quickly as possible. And if they decide not to, if they decide to say, yes, well, they do support an end to white babies, you will have so thoroughly destroyed them, and you will know so much more about them that you need to know in order to have any interaction with them moving forward. A person or a people that wants white erasure is the kind of person that you need to keep it at arm's distance, like you would a drug abuser who might decide to, break into your home or steal your purse or what have you. You can also ask them if they use a word like racist or anti-Semite or bigot or anything like that. You can ask them, why do they use the vocabulary of white oppression? Why are they using the vocabulary of white oppression? Those words are used to oppress the white race. And so you can, by that method, also put them on their heels. But again, a big thank you to Michael and anyone else. If you're listening now to the show and you have used any of these dialectics or lexicon and had success, please give your testimony in the chat so that others can see and be emboldened by your success. So that's what I would say, Laura, from now in the future. Don't back up and say, well, I just prefer my own. No. Put it right on them and say, why do you oppose my choice to marry or to date white men and to have white babies? What is it that you have against white babies?
Yeah, it reminds me of something I've been seeing in the UK. And Laura, I'm curious if you've seen any of these. There are advertisements. It's not directly related to what Jason just said. It's indirectly related. It reminds me, and it is great to hear that testimony, by the way, that there are these ads from your health service that show mixed couples, and they're looking for, I believe it's bone marrow transplants or maybe other kinds of medical procedures when the child has some kind of ailment, and that neither parent is genetically close enough to their own child to be able to be the donor. And there's this campaign to find donors for the child that is suffering whatever this ailment is, which is a fascinating thing because the way genetics work, it's kind of everything is mixing like this. There's like this crisscross. And so if you have an offspring with someone that's genetically far away from you enough, let's say, you could be more related to your white friend. Like Jason and I could be more related to each other than if one of us theoretically had an offspring with a non-white woman, which is, I mean, it's just fascinating the way that works. But have you seen these ads? I've seen people sharing them on social media from the NHS over there in Britain.
Yeah, I think I have just on Twitter. And it reminds me of when Give Blood were trying to collect blood for, well, not for certain races, but it was saying that for African people, they're less likely to have this type of blood, and we need more of this type of blood. Anyway, it was like something to do with your genetics and how you were more likely to have one type of blood. And loads of people were like piling on to give blood, calling them racist and stuff, saying, you can't just ask for African blood, or you can't just ask for white blood. And they were defending themselves, saying, well, look, no, there's genetic differences between the races. We need this to be able to save lives. And everybody was just calling them racist. But there are so many medical things where you need to be connected to somebody of a similar race to yourself. But at the same time, people will still say that race is just a social construct. How can there be these scientific facts that show that it's real and show that there are genetic differences between us? But then at the same time, people will just say that race, it's just made up. Somebody made it up. There's no such thing as white or African. I just find that crazy.
Yeah, definitely go after them. This is another great opportunity. When they when they give these MPs, mean pathogens, according to my doctrine, when they recite these sort of things, don't show the hypocrisy or the incongruency of their positions. Don't start with that. You can work into that. Start with how idiotic and anti-white it is to say that there's no such thing as races. Always frame it in this sense that we are the people. It is our story that everyone else is going to orbit in, because we have allowed the anti-whites to cunningly and brilliantly put their narrative at the center of our lives, and then we orbit this narrative of theirs. This is what we have to put an end to in every single one of our conversations that we have, friends, family, and strangers, is immediately, why are you being anti-white with this claim that there are no such thing as the races? Then once you have them on their heels, then you can talk about, well, in one case you say, obviously this is an anti-white position, because in one case you arrive at an anti-white conclusion by saying there is no such thing as races. But then in another case, you arrive at an anti-white conclusion by saying, well, there are white people and we're not going to be hiring them for the upcoming job, or we're going to be excluding more white people from the university's admissions. So why is it that you are so anti-white? This is, folks, I want you all to become extremely powerful in your conversations, in those personal conversations, in those friendly conversations, in those conversations with strangers. I want you to win those conversations. This is how you win. This is how you walk away with the laurel of victory around your neck. And you have that other person, either if they were a prospect, a white person who could come to this cause, thinking, wow, I was really wrong there. I feel really dumb for having believed those anti-white thoughts. And believe me, they will. Or if they were a vicious anti-white, feeling that the sting of defeat, which is what you have felt throughout your life in all of these conversations, folks, you have had these conversations. And even though you knew you were right and had the facts on your side, you still walked away with the sting of defeat after those conversations. Let's turn it around. Let's leave them with the stinger in their side, thinking about it for the rest of the day. Like that professor, I assure you, every day since that day that he or she admitted to the class that he or she was anti-white, that professor has been thinking about that. That professor has talked with other professors about how to handle that in the future. And they all have sat around dumbfounded without being able to come up with an answer for how to handle being pivoted into and vectored into the point where they have to admit that they're anti-white. There's simply no way out of that corner.
Yeah, and one word too on this topic is a regular chat member, Gabriela Gonzalez. I want to highlight. She says, I know a woman who miscegenated and her mixed daughter died of cancer because the family couldn't find a blood donor that could match the child's blood. So sad story there, but a lot to think about with the consequences of this. And I have a happier regular chat too, Lordy Sparker, not really on topic, but I like this and I appreciate this and want to share it with the audience and you, Jason, if you missed it. Lordy Sparker says, Jason and Jared, watched your spring incantation video with my 18-year-old son and 9-year-old daughter. It was a very special experience, especially as my son is very awake. Thank you both. We need more. That's just a short 2-minute incantation Jason and I recited outdoors, celebrating the spring and the spring of our people. Why don't we get back a little bit more to the EU before we go on to some other things? And Laura, I just wanted to put this question to you because, again, in my own research about this, a theme came up. And it's something that we need to constantly think about. It relates somewhat to what Jason was just saying, because Jason is developing these terms and these new approaches. So it dovetails with that, and the idea that words are kind of nebulous. And we forget sometimes that words are just pointers to things, and that they can mean different things to different people. They can point to slightly different things. So when this whole concept of the EU, or United Europe, was first hatched decades ago, it meant different things to different people, and different factions kind of ran with it. You were saying, Laura, that a lot of people who are talk about the remaining, they are still couching it in economic terms, and they're thinking of it just in terms of trade and what is going to be good for the economy in Britain. And also, I have the feeling from what I've gathered that maybe a lot of young people, and this is what I'm curious to have you speak to, is that this whole idea of the EU and Europe as a state or a zone, it has an emotional appeal to them. Like, to them, it means being hip and young and with it, where, you know, we're going on vacation to the beaches in Spain or in Croatia, and it's this cosmopolitan, international jet set. That is this romance that they have. And so all of these same terms mean different things to different people. And that is something that I think is must be exploited over there. We know that that phenomenon of words being slippery is exploited everywhere in all kinds of quarters in what we talk about. But that is it's kind of a general question, admittedly. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, because it's just something that occurred to me randomly as I was taking all of this in and thinking a little about this show today, is that a lot of the people, especially the young people that oppose this and want to remain, it's not some grand understanding of history and economics that they're defending. It's a romantic vision, and they're being open and cool, and, like I said, going to the different beaches and having the borders open, and really have no clue of the consequences on culture and heritage and people like you're experiencing. So if you have anything to say to that, I'm curious.
Yeah, well, you only have to look at the tweets and the stuff that they have meltdowns over to see where their priorities lie, because they moan about not being able to take their cats on skiing holidays and not being able to buy like tofu cheesecake anymore.
Cats
Who
on
cares
ski
about
homes?
stuff like that? Maybe I'm exaggerating, but it's the most kind of removed, kind of cosmopolitan middle class champagne socialist stuff that they moan about, and it's things like, oh, now I'm going to have to buy like cheddar cheese because I'm not going to be able to buy this posh cheese anymore. And it's just like, my priorities when it comes to Brexit are us remaining a sovereign nation. Obviously, immigration. I know that Brexit isn't going to fix everything there because we've still got the immigration from outside of the EU to deal with. But immigration and the laws that they have in the EU, things like the meme ban is obviously a very recent one, controlling what we can say online. And also in the EU, they're talking about starting a Euro-African economic area, which will include the free movement of people from Africa. People are saying that it won't at the moment, but it will. And there's obviously talks of a European army and things as well. And I just want to get out of that. I just want us to be a proud sovereign nation again. But I think the divide between the working class, who are Northerners, not all of them, they tend to have voted leave, and then the middle class in London tend to have voted remain, and each side just doesn't understand each other. It's a completely different way of life. Like, my priority isn't how much it's going to cost me to go on holiday or buy an expensive car. My priority is who's going to be moved into my neighbourhood, like a family of 15 moving next door to my mum, and, you know, like safety and immigration and the street where I grew up not being recognisable anymore, and not being able to speak out against things online or even in person without a risk of getting a criminal record. That's what my priority is. And yeah, it's just completely different worlds. I just think that a lot of the people who are very boldly supporting Remain, their priorities are just, I just don't understand their priorities at all, but they don't understand my priorities. But you know, maybe in some ways they have an easier life, so they're a bit more disconnected from what's actually going on down on the ground.
Yeah, the other thing too, and again on this theme of the words meaning different things to different people, this is not the EU as we know it. Is not an Oswald Mosley, someone I know that you love and admire, a vision of Europe a nation. It's not a Carl Schmitt imperium kind of Europe. They're revealing their hand when they're talking about this African zone that you were just saying, because I think that is exactly where all of this is going. It was a test run to dissolve borders, make it easier to travel amongst the European countries. And maybe in the short term, in the last few decades, people were like, oh, great, it's easier to go ski in Switzerland. Nice. It's easier to get cheese from these other countries. But then the zone expands. What was it? In 1992 is the Maastricht Treaty. I don't know if it was a treaty or something, but in Maastricht in the Netherlands, there was an accord. And that's what Nigel Farage says, that's what triggered him to begin campaigning and devoting much of his life for the UK leaving the EU, because he was one of the people who saw how this was just this slow creep, how it wasn't about this grand cultural union of Europe and trying to make sure that there were no more brothers' wars. If people like us were in charge, then maybe there would be some kind of grand unified Europe, but it would be in a totally different context with totally different aims, with totally different strictures and understandings. This is obviously, it was a dress rehearsal for some kind of globalist internationalist order where these states have no sovereignty and there's a superstructure that's not accountable to anyone, and that corporations and banks play into this as well. So I think we all know the score of this. But that too is something to consider, that if we were living in a parallel universe where we had European populations that still had that sense of pride and self and confidence, and there was an understanding that yes, there are these beautiful different hues, these beautiful different sub-stories within the greater European story, within the greater story of Western civilization, and that you want to maintain the character of our different countries, but there's also a tremendous common cultural heritage, and we had a proper sense of us and them with trade and military protection, then maybe, yes, you could have a situation where it's somewhat easy for someone from England to travel to Germany and Croatia and Sweden and the like, because that's a common zone and a common cultural heritage. But we're nowhere near that. That's not at all what this is. So we could theorize about future orders where there's an alliance culturally, trade-wise, militarily amongst the white European nations, but that's obviously not at all what this is. And the kinds of priorities that you're talking about and the people that express about their holidays is unfortunately just one of the many symptoms of our insanely selfish modern era, where people are not thinking long-term and not seeing where this is going. The writing's on the wall that they want some kind of a borderless zone, and that this is all an excuse for peoples from non-European countries to move in and demographically destroy Europe and make it this economic zone where everyone is just kind of these mindless consumers, and there's a lot of war and strife and overlords lording over it. But I think we know all that. So perhaps we can use this as a way to get into new subjects, unless Jason has some super chats before we do.
I do have some super chats, and I also wanted to mention, because we do have a question that we can pass around the group, that the EU is the founding personality, the founding spirit behind it is this Kalergi, and all you need do is look into the writings there, and you'll find a lot of the answers to why you see the things that you see taking place. The intent is to commit white erasure of the population, erasing not only our people as a biological entity, but also our culture, and obviously because we wouldn't be there to create or perpetuate it, but our architecture, our history, our everything. So just do a little bit of research, and you'll find what the objective is of these individuals, and then you won't have to ask ever again what they are up to. There'll be no more head scratching. We can just finally put our thoughts on how to resolve the problem, which is where we need to be thinking, no longer about who's in charge and what their objectives are. I mean, folks, for God's sake, if I live on a parcel of land beside you and you never talk to me, but every day you see me out there and you see me pouring concrete and you see me putting up 2x4s, and those 2x4s eventually begin to look like a house, and you can see the peaks of a house taking shape. You don't need to abduct me and drag me into a darkened room and shine a bright white light in my face and ask me or demand of me what I intend to do on that property. You can tell by my activity that I'm building a house. That is how we understand what the anti-whites are up to. We can tell what they want, what they desire, by the works that they involve themselves in. So now it's just a measure of no more lamenting about how they're in charge, no more wondering about who is dominating our different institutions, which we refer to collectively as the regime. No more endless pedantic prattling on the opinions of how it's reminiscent of other regimes 2,000 years ago or 500 years ago. Now is just the time. We need to be pragmatic, utilitarian, like business people, figuring out how to solve the problems that are in front of us. We have challenges, we have dialectics, and we have a lexicon. Your job is not to figure out, my job is not to figure out how we're going to plant our flag of victory on the lawns of the Capitol buildings in our countries. That is not the objective of today. The objective of today is to spread this curative contagion far and wide, because that will provide us with a new context that will enable us to take steps that are heretofore invisible to us. So we do have some super chats. Lordy Sparker super chatting with $2 and writing nothing, but we deeply appreciate the investment in white well-being. Thank you very much for that, Lordy. Steve Bin Bob, super chatting with £2, also writing nothing, but thank you very much, Mr. Bob, for that super chat and investment in white well-being. And of course, by way of the familiar alternative. And again, folks, if you have curious about super chatting, you can super chat here on YouTube, or you can look down into the description and you will find a familiar alternative. Roy Danton doing that for a second time, this time super chatting with $10 with a question for all of us, writing, when you are sitting at a table in the cafeteria and you overhear multiple people are having a conversation, does it make sense to interrupt and confront them with their anti-white narrative? So far, I've always been scared of making a fool out of myself. Before we answer that question, I just saw that Zero Schizo, a new friend of ours, super chatting with $2 Peruvian, writing, just here to support my friend Laura and you guys. Well, you are a dear friend. Thank you very much for that kind super chat to the cause of white well-being, good sir. Back to Roy Danton's question and his super chat, investment in the cause of white well-being. I would say it is dependent on the situation, whether or not you interrupt them. Do you know the people? Are you ever going to see them again? It's sort of like a game theory situation. If it's strangers and you're going to be moving on, and you feel like, I've had this myself plenty of times where I'm in public and I hear strangers talking about something that is clearly anti-white, and I just can't resist myself, especially if they look like one or two or more of them could be converted. They could be brought to the cause of white well-being. And that's really the reason why you're talking about these things. You can have that little thrill of taking on some anti-white, and Laura has shared some of these, and I'd like really looking forward to Laura's response. But sometimes I've taken the opportunity to just kind of shock some anti-whites. But in other occasions, if it's somebody that a situation where you don't know the people, and perhaps some of the people that are listening, you can tell by the looks on their faces that they think what's being said to them is kind of dubious, they're not sure, go ahead and make a comment. Go ahead and say to that person who's talking, damn, that's really anti-white of you to say X, Y, or Z. Give the reason, like maybe it's you could use one of the meme curatives that I shared last night, which is that it's not the similarities that make us the same, it's the differences that make us different. So if that is applicable to their conversation, say, wow, that's really anti-white. It's not the similarities that make us the same, it's the differences that make us different. And then just walk away. If you're never going to see them again, it is a superb opportunity to just like, it'll be like hitting a giant glass window with a hammer. It will explode in their midst, and it'll give the white people there that we're hearing the nonsense an opportunity to say, wow, we're not alone. And let me tell you what, the power of someone coming out of a group, and this kind of thing has been calculated and done by the anti-whites in the past to us on purpose. They'll have a speech going, and then they'll have somebody say it's a nationalistic speech or whatever, and they'll have somebody post up in one corner and somebody in another corner and somebody in another corner. And then at different times, they'll shout disagreement. And it gives the impression that there's this general objection from the community to what's being said. You standing up as someone just out of the community and saying something against anti-whiteism in the midst of such a conversation gives that same impression. They then wonder how many other people around us are disagreeing with the anti-white things that are being said out loud. Now, you also have to consider, and then I'll pass it over, you also have to consider things like, are these people who, if it's a place of employment, are these people who can hurt you potentially in the future? And by hurt you, I mean, could they get you fired? Would you be unable to get another job and feed your family? You want to remain in a position to continue to serve white well-being, and you're not going to be very effective in the service of white well-being if you're living on a cardboard box down by the river. So you've got to gauge these things by the scenarios that you're in. But I strongly encourage, especially if you're in a safe environment and a man as well, specifically if you're a man and you can defend yourself. But if you're in a situation that's safe otherwise, and you can say a little comment and just move on, that will be one of the most powerful things you can do for the cause of white well-being. Jared and Laura, if you have anything on your mind, please jump in. And by the way, I just want to say to the audience, this is the first time that Laura has been back in a while. But Laura's not just a guest on Tap. She is a guest co-host. She has served as a co-host on this show a couple times before, and she will again in the future. So she's not just another returning guest. She is like a returning dignitary. So I'll pass it over to Laura if she has anything to add to this or anything completely different, and then we'll hear Jared's views on this.
Well, I just wanted to mention Sir Oswald Mosley because Jared mentioned him very briefly earlier, and he's a huge inspiration towards me, and like my heart actually aches when I listen to his speeches, and I hate the disgusting, slanderous way that he's dragged through the media, and people don't know anything about him, but they critique him so easily. And people keep comparing him to the EU, or the EU are fascist, just like Oswald Mosley. And I just think, like, shut up. How dare you compare Sir Oswald Mosley to the EU? But it just reminded me of something because I mentioned him on a stream the other night, and my grandma has started watching my YouTube videos, and she phoned me up afterwards and told me off, and she was like, don't mention Sir Oswald Mosley on YouTube because you'll get told off. And she knows I'm in the Hope Not Hate State of Hate report, so that speech will probably be in the report next year. But hello, Grandma, if you're listening. But I just wanted to say
hello, Grandma.
Hello, Grandma Towler. Yeah, I don't know why she started watching my videos. She reads my articles as well. She's totally our grandma. But Mosley, such a good guy, and he cared so deeply about not just the English but Europeans, and the way that he was treated and the lies that have been told about him. I would just encourage anybody who thinks he's a bad person to go out and read his books. Read The Greater Britain and Fascism 100 Questions Asked and Answered, which are two very short books. And then if you're also interested in his actual personal experiences, he has My Life, which is a huge book. It's about 550 pages long. But he is an absolute hero, and I'm not ashamed to say that, even though my grandma will probably call me up now and tell me off again. But he was a good man, and I'm too honest for my own good. I'm not going to say that somebody was bad when they were a good person. And he's a huge inspiration to me. And when I get abuse as well, he's kind of somebody who makes me feel strong. Like when I think about what happened to him, I just think, well, if he went through that, then I can handle a few threats online. Yeah, he influences me in so many ways.
It's great to hear that he had that love of England, and I'm sure that's something that really stirs your heart. But that he also looked outward to the entire European community. You know, that's something that means a lot to us here. You hear a lot of people, especially in the United States, try to make these arguments about, well, the different waves, even of European immigrants and conflicts among different European ethnicities. And there was never really anything as white. So we have to really be nimble about that and understand our past and yes, acknowledge. No one's saying that there aren't differences among the different European ethnicities, but there's certainly much more that meaningfully unites all of us, especially in the face of adversity like we're experiencing today, than there are shared with others, people that are not European. So I'm sure maybe this relates to the question that Jason got from the super chat, where someone was asking about, or it was Roy asking about confronting people. And it sounds like you have someone in Moseley to inspire, strengthen you. And maybe that's part of the answer as well, is to have a few heroes, a few examples of people that you can draw strength from when you need to drum up that courage for whatever it is. But I don't have much to add to what Jason said. Of course, you do have to assess the situation. But if it makes sense to, I think we certainly do need to have that peer-to-peer communication and be an example and not let these things always fall by the wayside, because that's how minds are slowly changed. Even if someone pushes back at you in the moment, they might be thinking about something that you said at 3 a.m. The people who were in that class that Jason relayed that story about, the super chat from the other show, from the Going Free stream he did yesterday, they may be thinking about what that student said when they're in the privacy of their own home, when they wake up in the morning. So you never know how a seed planted is going to change. You hear a lot of big content creators. You'll hear Lana on Red Ice say things like, there were people who would write them like hate mail, and 2 years later totally change their tune and say, wow, we went from hating you to being regular listeners. So these things do happen. We do change minds. But Laura, I don't know if you had anything else to add to that before we move on a little bit.
No, just to echo what you guys said, really. I just agree exactly with what you've said. So there's probably no point in me repeating it as well. But yeah, just got to keep at it. Yeah.
Well, actually, we did have another super chat. Thin Red Line. Is that Danish Krona 100? Thank you. This is a bit of a different topic, but maybe some brief thoughts on Laura. How do you see the possibility of civil unrest in Britain like the Yellow Vests in light of the failed Brexit?
Well, I think that people should be rioting already because of the mass-scale rape of young English girls. And when I see something like that happening, some newspapers were saying it's up to a million girls that have been affected. That doesn't mean up to a million girls have been raped, but they've been involved in some way. I don't understand why people aren't rioting about that. So I don't know. I think that comfort is a big thing. And William Luther Pierce said that comfort is the great corrupter, the great maker of cowards. And I think that when people are too comfortable and it's not affecting them directly, they just don't respond to it at all. So I'm not sure if people still have hot running water and Netflix and takeaways and nightclubs on a weekend and football to go watch, then maybe they won't riot. But I would hope that the Leave voters, because it's such a huge portion of their population, I mean, I'm definitely going to get involved. I would hope that we can go and do something when we're betrayed, because I think it will happen. And yeah, we just need to just put our heads together and get behind something. I mean, we marched for, I was too young, but for the Iraq War, when we protested against that, there were huge marches through London against that. So hopefully they will, but I'm not that hopeful, if I'm honest, but hopefully, but I'm not sure if it'll happen.
There does seem to be a different sense of it in France, with their desire to be a thorn in the side to the system, more so than the English. But we will see. We'll wait and see. I agree with your sentiment that there should have been rioting when we saw what was happening to those girls in those northern cities with the grooming gangs. It's one of the things that woke me up. And, I'm here on the other side of the pond. But as we speak about often on the show, we have a sense of our shared spirit as people of European descent, and it totally rocked me when I heard about that and the cover up and the excuses. That was one of the things that was life changing for me, and one of the reasons I'm here. But why don't we transition and bring out the scope even further to speak about mass immigration and the way that demography has changed in the UK in the post-war period since the end of the World War II. And we can track this with similarities in the United States, which I think is fascinating to show to any normie type person and show them, well, you think it's random that this is happening in all these countries at the same time. But just to catch up some of our American listeners, what is this empire windrush? What was that in the second half of the 20th century? Mass immigration beginning in 1948, interesting year. Obviously, World War II had just ended. So why don't you give us a brief overview of how we got to this place where you had these idyllic English towns, and then all of a sudden we're dealing with these non-white populations that are demanding that you bow and kowtow to them, and if you don't, that you're racist, and all this kind of moral blackmail and actual blackmail.
Yeah, okay. I mean, this is a huge topic. I could probably talk about it for hours, but Britain's always been a homogenous nation. So we were invaded by European armies, obviously, during past years, but they were actual invasions. So people coming in with their swords and their axes and trying to take over us. But still, the non-native percent of the population has always been less than 5%. All the way up until World War II, well, up until 1948, the end of World War II. So in 1801, we started a census in Britain, and we started recording the demographics of the country. And then in 1851, we started recording the country of birth of everybody who was in the country. And it was up until 1931, that number was always less than 2%. I mean, you can obviously add a couple of percentage on for foreign-born people who had their own children, but even if you look at the infant mortality rates, life expectancy, and the fertility rates, maximum before the 1930s, we were probably around 2.5% non-native. And then in 1948, Empire Windrush docked in Tilbury, carrying a number of immigrants from the Caribbean, and that's when mass immigration kicked off. So
That was the name of a ship.
Yes, Empire Windrush. It was the name of a ship, and there's quite a lot to do with it that I'd love to talk about, but I'm not sure how far to go on YouTube. But I would encourage people to read an article by Andrew Joyce, who wrote about the origins of the Empire Windrush and about the New Zealand shipping industry and who was behind it all. But some people, we kind of blame the government for it. We say the government started mass immigration in 1948, but the people, the British people in the country never wanted it. The government betrayed us. But I'm actually not sure how many people in the government actually knew what was going on, because with Empire Windrush, they were making profits from bringing people over here, and the people who were behind the Empire Windrush that we're not allowed to talk about. So they basically encouraged all these non-whites, these African Caribbeans, to come over to Britain for a better life. Now, the ones that live here now, so like David Lammy, for example, they've been taught that they came over to this country to help rebuild our country following on from the end of World War II, which is just a load of crap. They didn't do that. I mean, David Lammy's dad, for a start, was a taxidermist, so I don't know how he rebuilt our country by stuffing animals. But they were encouraged to come over here for a better life, and they did, and they came over. So throughout the 50s, 60s and 70s, net immigration increased to Britain by only around 500,000 a decade. And then once we got to 1997 and Tony Blair became Prime Minister, him and Barbara Roche, Jack Straw, Peter Mandelson, 3 other people to look up on Wikipedia, they just increased mass immigration to Britain so rapidly. And over the last 2 decades, since 1997, the country has just changed. It's just not recognisable from what it is in the 90s. The census that I mentioned earlier, in 1991, we started recording the ethnicity of everybody in the country, so not just foreign born, but the full ethnicity. And in 1991, we were 94.1% white. And then in 2001, it had dropped to 91% white. And then in 2011, it's now 87% white. So the next census is in 2 years. And if it includes the ethnicity category, they might just remove it so we can't see what's going on. It's going to be less than 80% white. And as we know, we've got countries like London, Leicester, Luton, Slough, Bradford, Birmingham, where the white British are already a minority in their own cities. So that's a very quick overview. I think I did it in about 3 minutes there.
That was impressive. Yes. So you said what was the census where it had to drop to low 90s? Was that 2001 or 1991?
So it was 94.1% in 1991.
And then by now, where it's getting close to dipping under 80.
Yeah, so 2011 was 87% white. So not white British, but fully white. So 13% non-white. And then because the census is every 10 years, the next one is in 2021. And we can work it out from looking at immigration to and from Britain and the fertility rate. And basically it's going to be high 70s white for the whole country.
It's extraordinary. Your video on propaganda, I liked that a lot because you talked about being in some of these towns that weren't affected by it yet, which was at first, I was just enjoying that aspect of it. But then you brought up the good point that a lot of people there they're removed from all of this. So they have this grandiose idea, this romantic, again, idea of letting everybody in and being open-minded and all that, but they haven't even been affected by this yet. And that's what's scary, is that this is just being sold as this fantasy. And then by the time the gates are open, people don't realize what they've been advocating for.
Yeah, so the propaganda video that I made, it's funny actually because it was banned when I made it. And I think it's because I spoke about Edward Bernays and I said that he was Jewish in the video. And I think that's why they banned it. Then they decided to put it into a limited state, and it's been in a limited state for the last 3 months. And then this week they took it out of limited state randomly so people can watch it and comment on it again and stuff now. But that video was, I went down south to spend some time with some friends, and it was just completely white. So I was walking around the countryside and going to cafes and drinking tea. They don't have Yorkshire tea down there. And going around looking castles and stuff. And it was just lovely. But all the people in these lovely English cities, proper liberal and proper lefties, and they all had like "Don't blame me, I voted Remain" t-shirts on and refugees welcome stickers on their cars. And all the bookshops were filled with like progressive and feminist literature and stuff. And I was just thinking to myself the whole time I was down there, do you guys not understand what you have to lose? You have this beautiful town or this beautiful village where people were like getting things out of their boot and then walking down the street and leaving their boot open, things like that. Can you imagine doing that in London?
That's a trunk for the Americans.
Yeah, sorry. Trunk. Do you not call it a car boot sale?
No.
What do you call it? A yard sale?
Oh, say, I'm sorry. I thought you meant car trunk, but what'd you say about a yard sale?
Yeah, I think when you sell stuff out of the back of your car, do you not call it a car boot sale?
Yeah, no, it's a yard sale or garage sale in the States.
Okay. Yeah, so in these English cities, it was just safe. There were like unsupervised children playing in the street, and they just wanted to welcome all these refugees and foreigners. And I was thinking to myself, you have no idea what you stand to lose. And it's propaganda, isn't it? It's brainwashing that's made them think that diversity is our strength and we're all the same. And it's just naivety. These people have got no experience of diversity at all. But then at the same time, you look at somewhere like London, where there's hardly any white people, and I think to myself, well, you people do have experience of diversity. Why are you okay with this? When you're seeing people being stabbed in London every day, a few times every day, how have you not woken up? So I think it's a combination of not being exposed to diversity, but also just being completely brainwashed by the media, being indoctrinated, and also being intimidated against speaking out against it. I think it's those few things that stop people from realizing what's happening.
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, we should start calling this the Cosby effect, because there's such a powerful meaning there. In the United States, so many white people learned about non-white people by way of a show called The Cosby Show. And that was a show where there was a character called Huxtable, I think his name was. He was a a doctor of some sort, of course, some master doctor, brighter than any white man that ever has lived before. And I think the mother was a lawyer. Now that okay, so she was a lawyer, and they were this perfectly functioning non-white family. And then what do we find out in the real world? So white people were learning what non-whites were when they didn't live around them by way of the Cosby show, and then they look at all of their white brothers and sisters, and they say, "What's your issue with it? I mean, look at how high achieving and brilliant they are, and high functioning. They're better than your families. What are you, just jealous of them?" And then in reality, what was happening while he was making that show, Cosby, and prior to making that show, he was drugging and raping white women. Now he also drugged and raped non-white women, but I'm most concerned with my sisters being raped by that bastard. So the whole time that the white population was receiving this message that the non-white families were high functioning, were highly intelligent, and were depicted perfectly by this show called The Cosby Show, in reality, the actor playing the role, not in real life, but playing the role, was doing something that is very reminiscent of a large percentage of certain populations, which we won't say so that YouTube won't shut this stream down, but very reminiscent of some other populations, in that he was drugging and raping and has been convicted, surprisingly so. I'm surprised they didn't let him get away with it, but convicted for the drugging and raping of white women. And so this is the Cosby effect. Maybe this can be something we can now coin and use to great effect in the future. The Cosby effect, when you go to a white area and all of the white people wonder, well, what's the problem with this multiracialism? We have a non-white, I'll briefly tell you, I met these two girls, they both quite beautiful, from Connecticut years ago in the city. And they were staying for, I think it was 4 days with their mother, who was on some sort of trip. They had money, they were in a nice hotel. And I met them out. Actually, they came over to me and a friend of mine, and were introduced themselves. We had a conversation. I ended up taking them out that night and the next night, actually all but the last night. And the reason why was the first night, as I was talking about things, and I said, "Oh, we can't go here, we can't go there because of X, Y, or Z." And they said, "Well, why? It doesn't make any sense why we wouldn't be able to go to these areas." So finally, I had to ask them, "How many of these groups of people do you actually live around?" And they said, "Well, we have one. There's one in our town." And I said, "All right, this, folks, by the way, this is called numerical diffidence. When a group of non-white people are in your midst and they are numerically too small to manifest their biospirits, they do everything they can to imitate our biospirit. However, once they achieve what we call numerical courage, they then manifest and project that biospirit onto the world around them." So I said, "Well, there you have it then. You all have not been exposed to this before, the reality. You have this one person who is behaving according to your norms because of this situation that he or she was in." And the second night, they still thought I was too critical. By the third night, they had completely changed their minds. And the fourth night, they were too afraid to leave their hotel. So the cognitive dissonance, my sharing of truth, and I have a sterling track record for bringing people over to the cause of white well-being, even to stunning sisters over the period of just a few days. Sharing the truth with them seeing that truth by way of the streets and the city as it actually was, the cognitive dissonance of that reality to everything that they had learned up to that point had so educated them in the span of those days that they were too afraid to leave the hotel. So I was permitted to stop by. It was very uncomfortable to be there with the mother and all, but so that wasn't a going out night. But nonetheless, it was enjoyable. They were educated. And before we move away from that, I do want to say, though, Syrup did note that the hood in England is called a bonnet. Yes, that is indeed. It's a hood, except when I'm in England, then it's a bonnet. But I do want to note, I want everybody to take a look at the shirt that I'm wearing here. This fabulous shirt, Save Europe. This is a shirt that you can find over on George's website, which is thegreatorder.com. If you would like to get a shirt like this, head over there and you'll be able to find the links on there where to pick them up. And then you too can be fitted in this shirt. And when you put it on, I didn't have any of these muscles until I put the shirt on. So if you just wait till you get the shirt, you won't have to go to the gym at all.
But the spirit of your ancestors will infuse your, amazing.
But let me actually, no, I did want to read the super chats quickly. Hank super chatting with 15 pounds, didn't write anything, but thank you very much for that super chat, Hank. Syrup also super chatting, doing double duty as always, 5 pounds. Thank you so much. A lot of the British have been eating those clown pills, he writes. Apparently they have, especially down in that town. The Green Man of Albion super chatting with 5 pounds. Thank you very much for that investment in the cause of white well-being. England lives and marches on. Amen to that. Billahora super chatting with $5. Laura, thanks for the courage for our people. Which political party do you think is the most pro-native white people in the UK? Hold that question in your mind, Laura, if you will, because we have another super chat from Zero Schizo. Again, super chatting with $5 Peruvian and writing, Laura, do you think Excalibur could represent the British design, Martin Heidegger's term, for a more complex understanding of the Volkgeist and identity? So you have the question about the political party, which one is most for white people in the UK, and then the question about Excalibur. Pass it over to Laura.
Okay, well, the party that seems to be the most based, I would say UKIP, under Gerard Batten anyway, because he does talk about the anti-white agenda every now and again. He said something the other day that really disappointed me. Somebody asked him what he thought about demographics, and he said something like, I'm not interested in what percentage white people are, it's all about values, or something like that, which is so disappointing. It's so cooked. But he does seem to be the best, I think, best out of a mediocre bunch. So UKIP, I'd say, for that question, but don't get too excited because they're not that good. And then regarding Heidegger, my friend Zero's asked me a really difficult question there. But I'm actually friends with a guy called True Dilton. I don't know if you guys know him, but he's an Australian guy and he has a YouTube channel about philosophy. And he's so intelligent. Like, I don't understand half the stuff that he says, but me and him are talking quite a lot recently, and he's teaching me about philosophy. So he's been teaching me about Heidegger and Nietzsche and stuff. So if it's okay with you, I would like to answer that question in the future when I'm more comfortable talking about that.
Yeah, that could be a whole part of a show with the death scene of Excalibur. I think there's a lot of useful imagery in the Arthurian legends as well. It's something I think that we all would do well to explore and learn about, and teach each other about. So I think I'd like to do some content on it in the future. So certainly interesting things there. Getting back for a moment to the Empire Windrush and all of the demographic changes, there's always a justification. It's funny how you were told, your parents, grandparents were told that England, the UK, after the war needed the manpower, right? But as you pointed out in one of your videos, a lot of people from the UK went to Australia. And also, you very poignantly point out that Japan, which suffered 2 atom bombs being dropped on it, they recovered and they didn't need to bring in foreigners to help rebuild their labor base. So when are people going to realize that this is just, they will say anything, they will do anything to justify the weakening of our way of life and weaken our demographics?
Yeah, I mean, it's just common sense, really. Like I said about the points that I made in the video, Japan, I mean, I know they had money from America, but we had money from countries as well after World War II, and they didn't need mass immigration to rebuild the country, so why do we? And then there was the £10 POM scheme, where this was funded by the British government and the Australian government, by the way, not just Australia. We encouraged British people, so white people, to move to Australia for £10 to go and inhabit. So, and after that was for after World War II for a few decades. So if we were so short on staff, then why were we encouraging white people to leave? And then also, more British soldiers died in World War I than they did in World War II, quite a lot more. And we didn't need immigrants to rebuild after World War II. So why after World War One. So why did we after World War Two? And also the public have always overwhelmingly been against mass immigration. Any poll that you look at, any study from between 1945 and today, it's always more than half of the public who are against mass immigration. It is actually dropping, but people need to consider that it's not just ethnically British people that are being asked. So obviously, if you're going to ask an 87% white country against a 100% white country, it's going to drop a bit. And also there's been more brainwashing between then and now as well to make people think that diversity is our strength. But the public have always been against it as well. And I was actually speaking to my grandma the other day. I'm mentioning her again. Hi, grandma again. But I was like, you were alive during Empire Windrush. What did they tell you about these foreigners that came to the country? And she was like, oh, we needed them to rebuild. And I was like, Grandma, no, we didn't. That's just what they told you. And I said all this stuff to her. And she was just like, oh, yeah, but at the time they told us that we needed them to rebuild. So that it's just lies, isn't it? They're just telling. But then at the same time, they're also telling the foreigners that. So they've come over with this like sense of entitlement, thinking that we need them, when actually they need us. They're getting a better life by being over here, but they think that they're helping us. So everybody's been lied to.
And let's talk about one of the aspects of that fallout and MPs, members of parliament, who don't have that sense of loyalty to England and the UK in general. We're seeing very similar things here. I think we can draw some parallels to the Senate committee. Right? Jason did a whole show on yesterday, so I wasn't able to make that or listen to that. I'd like to hear, maybe be caught up on some of that. But you have members of parliament. I know your favorite, Laura, is of course David Lammy, who these people are now the sons of that Windrush generation, the sons and daughters. Some of them are now in your parliament making laws affecting public policy, just like that woman with the ankle bracelet before who pushed through this delay on Brexit and not having a no-deal Brexit. So isn't that funny? Isn't that funny that they they're acting on one hand like they came to help Britain, but they don't have much of a loyalty to the nation, to the people of those isles, do they? So is that something, do you think that a lot of people are just willfully ignorant about that? Or are some people, is this, see, when I'm optimistic, I'm hoping that all of this, all these farcical goings on, even though in the short run they may seem ridiculous and they may be very well harming people, that inevitably they won't be able to hide the hand, won't be able to hide what's going on. That no matter what they try to do, the further they go, the more they're going to reveal all of the undercurrents, the nefarious undercurrents that are trying to destroy our people, destroy our civilization, and that they're going to reveal themselves, and that more people are going to wake up. And no matter what they do, they could try to jab and parry and do all kinds of things, but eventually more of this is just going to make more people wake up. That's when I'm optimistic. I don't know. We know a lot of people are brainwashed, like those people in the south of your country that are a little too comfortable right now. But I've seen some of the Lammy videos, and it's just unbelievable. The guy is just so ridiculously unqualified to be anywhere near a position of power and influence. And yet there he is. So what is that doing to the population there? What is that doing to the political conversation? Do people just make excuses for him? Or is it waking more people up, like I said?
Well, I actually feel like offering David Lammy a position at Defend Europa, because he wakes so many people up. He's much better propaganda than I am.
Good to hear.
And I actually tweeted the other day that I was going to offer him a job at Defend Europa because, first of all, he stopped people from donating to Africa by, I don't know if you saw the whole white saviour thing, but then he did something the other day. He posted this quote about fascism, and it was like, fascism keeps your streets clean and gives you a job and makes you feel safe. And it was that big speech that he posted, but he's so stupid that he forgot to post like the second part where it says, but then it does this.
Yeah, so he just a counterpoint of like, but it's really going to be damaging in the end.
He didn't do the counterpoint. He just posted the good stuff about fascism. And it was so funny. And everybody was retweeting him and saying, wow, David, I was always taught that fascism was bad, but you've converted me to it now. And that's the kind of IQ that he has. So he's an MP in a constituency which is 20% white. So he gets more and more share of the vote every time there's an election, and he thinks it's because he's really clever, but it's not. It's just because people vote along racial lines. And if you look at any study, it will show that every single race, apart from white people, have a high in-group preference. So, in fact, let me show you this tweet that he wrote the other day. So this was David Lammy yesterday, actually. He said, voter registration and voter ID schemes are designed to exclude poor and ethnic minority people who are already disenfranchised. So he's basically saying that you shouldn't have to register to vote, and you shouldn't have to have ID to vote, because ethnic minorities can't vote if you do have to have ID. So he's basically encouraging illegals to be able to vote. So it's obviously that he's doing that because he himself is a minority, an ethnic minority, and he wants other people, even if they're not citizens, to be able to vote without ID. And that's what he's like all the time. He's always moaning about reparations and how the British Empire was terrible, but then he switches between what he calls himself. So he sometimes calls himself African when he's moaning about the British Empire. He sometimes, or when he can use like a token victim status moan, he sometimes calls himself Caribbean when he's talking about slavery. He calls himself British when he's talking about us beating the evil Nazis during World War II. And he started calling himself English as well. So he wears a different hat depending on if it works well for him at the time or not. How can you be English, British, African, Caribbean? You can't be all those things. You can't just appropriate somebody else's ethnicity. Right. But the two main... Yeah, were you going to say something? No, I was just going to say that the two main campaigns that he follows are stop and search. So he wants to stop and search because Black people are being stopped and searched more, and diversity quotas. He wants just diversity quotas everywhere so that Black people are more likely to get high positions. And both of those campaigns that he follows very religiously are ethnic ones that are to do with his own people being able to advance. And if you look at other politicians like Diane Abbott, Naz Shah and Sadiq Khan, they're all exactly the same. Everything is ethnic and racial. Go look at their Twitter feeds and look at the things that they feel passionate about, and it's always to do with their own kind of people. And whites are the only group who act individual rather than collectively. So, yeah, David Lammy's the worst.
Yeah, well, he uses, and this speaks right to another question by Roy Danton, and we're going to get to some more of these super chats, and that is that he can be all of those things because they are all simply pretexts to arrive at anti-white conclusions. So there's no use in saying, how can he be this and how can he be that? Isn't he so dumb? No, he's actually being quite clever because he knows that you white people out there in the world, you're going to accept all his different arguments and he'll bully his way over you to achieve an anti-white conclusion. If he could, I mean, I know that there are white people out there that are so gullible that a non-white person could go to them and say in the exact same sentence, I am left and I am right, I am up and I am down, as long as all those directions reach an anti-white conclusion. And the white person would say, okay, yeah, that certainly makes perfect sense. And not only that, but they would end up viewing intelligence in the thought process. So Roy's question, super chatting with $10 by way of the familiar alternative, writes, thank you so much for your encouraging words. I can think of several safe situations with random strangers where I was too afraid they might come up with some quote facts or quote arguments that I wouldn't know how to counter. I just like during Brexit and Trump. Well, the bottom line is, and this is for you, Roy, and everyone out there that's hearing these words, you can simply say this to every single anti-white, every single miss, which is the moralization, intellectualization, and sentimentalization of pretext to arrive at anti-white conclusions. You can simply say to everything they open their mouth about that if it concludes with something that is anti-white, if there is an anti-white conclusion to the argument that they're making, you reject it. You don't care what they have to say. You will be intransigent no matter what. You are not going to move from your position that you object to everything that is anti-white. So no matter what it is, if it's about needing more labor to rebuild the country, no, you reject it because it's an anti-white conclusion. That's the end of that conversation. If it's the brown baby drowned in the surf, and so therefore we need to allow millions more into our country, no, you reject it because it's an anti-white conclusion. It's that simple. You do not need to know about all of these different subjects to reject them and to prevent anti-white conclusions. Use it, use it, use it. They cannot defeat you if you will simply use these tools.
And the counter to that is true too. You have to be comfortable using anything you can to get to pro-white conclusions. That's what we are very uncomfortable with.
Well, right. It's even saying, I mean, that's why many folks are just afraid to say the words anti-white, because then they're demonstrating that they have care. And this is a great example of the white noir that our people is suffering with. This absolute sickness that we have accepted the anti-white narrative and this morality, this anti-white morality that states that you are immoral if you care about the white, or if you care about the well-being of our people. That's why people are afraid to say that X is anti-white, because it immediately defines them as caring about white people, objecting to something that's anti-white, and that they know their subconscious minds is on fire, telling them that, my God, that's immoral. My God, you're going to be socially chastised for that. Well, you're going to have to get over it if we're going to survive. This curative contagion will save us, but you're going to have to get a little bit of backbone in order for it to work. So we also have Johnny Jones, super chatted with $10 by way of the familiar alternative, not writing anything, just the investment. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to Roy for another great investment in the cause of white well-being. We had Barack Sear, super chatting £4 by way of YouTube. Thank you very much for that investment. Bill O'Hora, super chatting with $5. Laura, what do you think of the party for Britain? Also, are many young whites in England coming to the cause of white well-being? Hold that question in your mind, Laura, from Bill O'Hora, because we also have a super chat from our very own, doing double duty, Spartan Warrior Queen, who is standing tall for the cause of white well-being, both in the chat and by way of super chats. Thank you very much, kind lady. Super chatting $5 writes, Laura, tell us your opinion on Julian Assange's forceful removal from the Ecuadorian embassy and his possible extradition to the U.S. on espionage charges. Great show, Jason and Jared. Thank you for all that you do for white well-being, and many thanks in return, Spartan Warrior Queen. So we have the question about Julian Assange, Laura, and we have the question about the For Britain party and are whites coming to the cause of white well-being in England?
Okay, well, for Britain, I think, I mean, I do quite like Anne-Marie Waters. I think she's quite brave with some of the stuff that she says, and she does speak out about the anti-white narrative sometimes, but the party just seems a lot more civic nationalist to me. So they have some high-ranking people in the party who aren't ethnically British, and they tend to kind of boss a lot of people about and sort of say, you know, anyone can be British and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, the party does seem to stand for some good things, but I don't think it stands for traditionalism. I think it's kind of like liberalism, but anti-Islam, if that makes sense. So I agree with it on some things, but I disagree with it on other things as well. And if white people are waking up in Britain, then I would say yes. I think our numbers are growing. I'm constantly getting messages from friends who aren't really involved in politics who are sending me messages saying, oh, you know, I'm sick of this advert and what they're saying about white women, or I'm sick of walking down the street and not hearing English being spoken when I go to work and stuff like that. So I think, I think a lot of people are waking up in Britain. I mean, we've still got the very vocal, like left-wing kind of beta males that just make it sound like we're all cooks over here, but we're not. We're really not. A lot of people are awake, but I just think we're more of a silent majority. In relation to Julian Assange, well, I think this just happened today, and I have to admit I've been at work all day, and then I got home and I turned this stream on, so I've not actually read any articles about what's happened to him, but if I understand it correct, was he pulled out of the embassy and arrested by
Yes.
Is that what
Dragged
happened?
out of the embassy.
Ecuador stopped giving him protection for some reason. It's not very clear.
Yeah, he looked like Santa Claus with AIDS as they dragged him from the building.
Yeah, well, I did see a picture actually, and he's got white hair and a long beard, hasn't he? One thing that I will say is that people seem to pick and choose what free speech they're going to support. And I'm actually not a free speech absolutist, so I don't agree with freedom of speech for everyone. But some people pretend that they are. and they kind of sail on this boat of freedom of speech, but then they pick and choose when they want to support certain people and other people. And I'm not sure how much support Assange is getting at the moment, but it wouldn't surprise me if some people who talk about freedom of speech sometimes don't support him. And it's the same with like Greg Johnson, who had his book, The White Nationalist Manifesto, banned from Amazon recently. Culture of Critique's been banned from Amazon recently. There have been cases like Alison Shablaws and Jez Turner who have been convicted for saying things that they should have been able to say. And people do just pick and choose kind of, you know, the free speech arguments that they want to support if they're not too edgy. So we'll have to see how many people get behind Assange. But yeah, I like him and I think he does good work. So,
well, there's definitely the grip is tightening everywhere, as we're seeing. As a side note, if you could press 1 in the chat, if you are in the UK, Ireland, or continental Europe, or I guess even Iceland, we're trying to see if this is a good time for you all to do the after party, because it seems like a good number of you are here. That would help Jason or I. If you are in Europe anywhere and you hit 1, if you could please do that in the chat for us, that would help, actually. But yes, the things are tightening up. The grip is tightening. And the question we were asking you about before with the MPs who are not loyal, I wonder why, to the English people and the British, wider British heritage, British nation, as we discussed in our great British Blood show back in July, which I encourage people to listen to. Laura was there. We had a special panel with Laura Morgoth, Woes, and Duke of Durham. If you really want to get hear from 4 British people what it means to them to be British, it was a really wonderful episode. But it dovetails with things that are going on here in the United States, and this is what I mean about the grip tightening around our throats. Is that you may have seen, Laura, that we had a Senate committee hearing here this week with people getting up and talking about how scary it is for people of European descent in a country founded by people of European descent to be concerned about their well-being, to be concerned about their demographic numbers. Now, I saw this article, just so happened to see this article in National Geographic about a town in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, that as recent as early 2000s was 95% white. And it was a working class town, but they were tight knit, and they had a festival every year called Fun Fest, as you find in a lot of small little towns, folksy kinds of things going on. And they can't even have their town festival anymore. They've gone, I think they're now a minority. Whites are a minority. That's how fast this has changed in less than 20 years. And I caught wind of it. I saw people retweeting it. I saw Critical Condition retweeted it. You had a great conversation with her. I do encourage people to go watch that as well. Laura was on Critical Conditions channel recently. She tweeted it, and actually Stefan Molyneux retweeted her. So it's okay when this is getting around. It's okay when National Geographic does a story about it. But when we say it, then all of a sudden it's hateful and it's white supremacy and all kinds of stuff like that. It's exactly what Jason was saying a moment ago. They'll go up, they'll go down, they'll go left, they'll go right. It doesn't matter. It's the conclusion is anti-white. I think I just made a little poem there. They'll go up, down, left, right. Doesn't matter. The conclusion is anti-white. Maybe we need to incorporate that into something. But we're not leftists here. You know, we don't do mindless chants. That's not our style. But I don't know if you saw any of this news, Laura. But it's something out of clown world. You couldn't write this, just like what we were talking about before with the MP who stopped Brexit, and she's an African politician who has an ankle bracelet on because she's currently in jail for fraud. We had Candace Owens talking about white nationalism, a black woman. We had a committee with, she was talking to a guy who's Chinese heritage, and we have people of Jewish heritage and people who are Arabic Muslims on the American Senate hearing on this about people on social media advocating for being white. They actually, we believe, indirectly referenced a Red Ice chat. And as Red Ice was covering it, a lot of you may know, their live stream chat, as they were simulcasting with this Senate hearing, was shut down. So we're seeing the same things happen everywhere. I don't really have a question here. I'm curious, Jason, if you have any thoughts or Laura has any thoughts on just seeing the parallels between what's going on in both of our countries and really most Western countries, where the lunatics have taken over the asylum essentially, and we're supposed to act like everything is okay. Well, these countries are buying for us, and we have this show where there's a hearing on white nationalism, and there's no one who's white who's even talking. I mean, you can't write this stuff.
No, it's absolutely despicable. Laura, do you have any thoughts about? I mean, I can give a few quick thoughts about what happened, and then we could get your input on the actual hearing.
Yeah, it's up to you. You go first if you like.
Yeah, because I don't know how much you know about it.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's I've had such a really busy week, so I've done like a stream pretty much every night. So I want to watch the Red Eye stream, but I have been following it on Twitter. And that Eileen Hershenov, she said, white nationalism is one of the many euphemisms for white supremacy. The core ideology of white supremacy now is the fear of the imminent genocide of the white race by a flood of non-whites. So we know that we are being demographically replaced, and that National Geographic article proved it. Not to mention that, just look at the statistics yourself. Anybody who's still denying this is either a coward or they have a malicious aim for doing it. And so we know that it is happening. So what they're essentially saying is, if you oppose becoming a minority in your own country, because that's what white nationalism is, wanting to remain the dominant ethnic group in our own country, then you're a white supremacist, and that's going to be illegal. I mean, how scary is that? I just think it's absolutely terrifying. And then on top of that, I wonder if people are asking, why is this only for white people? I wonder if people are saying, why are Facebook only banning white nationalism and not black nationalism? Because that's my top thought. Like, why is it different for white people to Jews? Why can Jews do stuff but white people can't? And I wonder how much of the public are actually asking, well, why is Israel allowed to do that but Britain's not allowed to do it? Do you guys think that normies would have that thought, or do you think that's just something in our circles?
Well, here's the thing: is that the great white pill, the great optimistic thing. I'll just share quickly, and I shared at the end of the stream, going free stream yesterday, is what they revealed to us at that hearing. Now, the purpose of the hearing was not to hear from white people, hear about our grievances, our angst, our suffering, etc. The purpose of the hearing is to propagandize the many millions of white working class people who need to be convinced that there is still such a thing as law and order in Western civilization, specifically in this case, in the United States. They need to be convinced of that, because they are a power that is greater than the anti-whites. I've talked about that before, and that is something that you should take great heart and know that the anti-whites who control the regime wouldn't bother with propagandizing these people. If they had absolute control and could do whatever they want, they would just tell us this. They would just say, you're just going to take it and accept this. No, this group of people, the middle class of whites with normal sensibilities, represent a force that's greater than the anti-whites. So what took place at this hearing? What took place was a theater to engender momentum in this many millions of white working class Americans to accept excesses of the law, to accept extra legal measures, to accept the revocation of rights from certain white people, because these are extraordinary cases. And then once the anti-whites are able to take these steps, they will then write the history that say that none of it took place. So no one that was there was meant to defend us. Everyone that was there, including Candace Owens, was anti-white. They were anti-white to varying degrees and anti-white for different reasons, but they were all anti-white. The big positive thing that took place at that hearing that the anti-whites revealed to us, and I spoke about at the end of Going Free yesterday, is that we don't have the power. We can deduce logically that the many millions of white working class Americans are not going to be happy, and they're already thinking about an anti-white America, an anti-white UK that is predominantly non-white, and how those are going to be environments that they're not going to want to live in. Whites in Canada the same, whites in Germany the same, whites in France the same, Australia the same, everywhere the same. We can deduce that with logic. What we do not have access to is the tech companies that the anti-whites have access to. We do not have access to the laws, to the governments that the anti-whites have access to. With all of that connections and money and power, they are able to reach down into the lives of those many scores of millions, hundreds of millions of whites in the middle class with normal sensibilities across Western civilization. And they can see by their actions, their decisions, the direction that they're heading, their actuaries that these anti-whites are reporting back with is that these white people are getting ready to rescind their allegiance to their governments, to their churches, to their universities, to the media. They're on the verge and they're heading that direction every single day. The anti-whites don't have power. They're not in control because they wait for something to happen and then they react to it. They look deep into the future and they take steps way in advance to prevent things that will undermine them and their efforts. They take those steps now when those things are going to happen in the future. So they reveal to us with their great power and ability to spy on white Americans, white Canadians, whites all the way around the world, that white people are getting ready to rescind their allegiance and they're going to be looking elsewhere for answers. And when they do, when that middle class does begin to rescind its allegiance and look elsewhere, that is when we are going to have the greatest opportunity. So every day from this day forward, this is the gift that the anti-whites gave us at that hearing the other day. This is the powerful gift. Every day, the soil is getting richer and richer for us and our message when it comes to our people out there in the middle class of our countries. So see what happened the other day as a great hope, a great boon to us. They're not moving to silence us. They're not moving because there was a terrorist act or a horrific act over in this country 5 years ago or 8 years ago, and then one 2 months ago or something. They're moving because they know all of those white people are about to turn their backs on these anti-white institutions that heretofore they had pledged loyalty to. And they know that white people crave nothing more than law and order, and that they will turn to people like us for the answers and the order and the peace that Western civilization used to provide them. That is what the anti-whites revealed to us the other day at these hearings. That's what it's about. Really quickly, Lordy Sparker, $5 super chat. Does local media in UK totally scrub the non-white perps, as they do here in the US, I suppose, is what he's talking about? I'm sure big media does. And Roy Danton, super chatting $9.99. Thank you both for these super chats. Roy writes, that's probably the most important lesson here. Previously, I thought I had to convince them I'm right or lose the argument and was afraid of strengthening them by losing the argument. Roy is obviously speaking about when you say to an anti-white, what I was saying earlier, that no matter what your argument is, if you arrive at an anti-white conclusion, I reject it. Please, everybody, use that. Thank you both for the super chats. Jared, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I want to ask Laura some things before we wrap up with her, but just real quick, Jason, on your point, and it kind of goes with what I was saying earlier about no matter how they try to fix things, the house of cards will keep crumbling. If they look into the future so much, why is it that they couldn't resist doing this in public and risk waking up more people, like you said, who crave law and order? And now we're going to see through things like this congressional hearing that the establishment really isn't on their side and they're revealing their hand more. Why would they do something like this publicly in a Senate committee as opposed to behind closed doors?
Laura?
Oh, no, I'm asking you, since you had brought up the point.
Why are they?
If someone were to counter what you just said.
Because the power, the only power that's greater than the anti-whites is the white working class. And they have to convince that white working class that law and order persists, that we're still a country of laws, that people will still be tried fairly, but that this is an extraordinary case that they have to take to silence these people. If they were to just come after us and silence us and revoke our rights of freedom of speech, these people by the many millions would see that and say to themselves, too many of them would say to themselves, good God, that could be me. That could be any of us. And they would realize that we are living in a tyranny that heretofore they believed we were not in. And so that
is a pretext to go after people doing things like this online.
Precisely. They need, and that's also the evidence that indicates really revelatory that these people do represent a power that is greater than the anti-whites in government and media, etc. Because if they didn't, the anti-whites would simply not bother with any sort of this theater for us. They would just silence us and be done with it.
And what was the excuse? I wasn't able to watch it. Was it the Tarrant incident in New Zealand? Was it some of the Muslim congresswomen who are questioning Israel's role? What did they use as the trigger point to have this in the first place, this congressional hearing in the first place, Senate hearing?
It was all anti-white. So they talked about Tarrant. They talked about the guy over in Norway or Finland or whatever it was. They talked about these crimes that are widely spread apart, that occur. They had to reach all around the globe to find these different events. They also brought up their bogus anti-white hate crime statistics, where they classify, reclassify, categorize, recategorize, massage the data any way they can to use these false equivalences, where they take a white guy called this non-white person a bad name, and that is tantamount to the white woman being gang raped and then her body having carved in her belly white devil after she's found. Those two acts are essentially both hate crimes. They're essentially the same thing. And then saying that using the conflict, the inevitable conflict of multiracialism that they have engendered. So using the inevitable conflict that they have engendered to then say, we need to silence white people. And they specifically said, this is very important. There's a quote, and I have it, that I pulled up yesterday, where they specifically said white identity. They didn't say white even supremacy. It's like I said, it's not white supremacy that they oppose, not white separatism, not white nationalism. It's white people, because they specifically revealed it by saying that white identity is the problem. They're not even going to allow us to acknowledge that we have an identity, a people, interests, etc. And that's why they're saying things like it was a threat to the nation. They use that kind of verbiage because they need to convince the middle class of white people that we have to take these extraordinary measures because it's a threat to the nation if we don't. So that is why I'm saying they've revealed to us something that we didn't have the ability to know, and that is to reach into these people's lives, into their private social media and conversations, as the tech giants have the ability to do, and see the current, what's the trend. And the trend is that all of these white people are getting fed up, whether it's the US or New Zealand or what have you. They're getting fed up, and these powerful people who have the ability to spy realize it, and all that they can think to do is silence these people from talking. Because if we don't silence them, if we can't build up the threat, the boogeyman, big enough to be able to silence them, then all of these many millions are going to reject us in the future and turn to these people. And what will it mean? Of course, they don't know. It might mean 100 new nationalistic type movements. It might mean a pan-European movement. They don't necessarily know what it means. It just means that the reins of power are slipping from their hands. So the only thing they can think to do is cut the tongues out of our mouths.
Well, let's try to end on a slightly more positive note then, and thank you for that exposition. It all makes sense, of course. I wasn't able to follow it myself. I've been doing some other things. But, Laura, in the closing minutes that we have now, I want to ask you just a little bit about Fraser Anning over in Australia. He is a politician who actually is putting it out there, is saying this nation was founded by and for peoples of European descent. And he's not afraid to say that. He started his own party just recently. I'm curious as to some of the things that you know about him and like about him, and particularly frame it in this question, whether it's in the UK or us here in the United States, especially in light of what Jason was just sharing. Is it time, as I suggested in a video of mine called White New Deal from a couple of months ago, is it time to hold politicians' feet to the fire? Not that we think everything really happens through voting anyway, but essentially say, we're not going to acknowledge you if you don't acknowledge us. If you can't talk about peoples of European descent, white people, as a thing that actually, and we have our own interests and our own way of life, then we're not going to vote for you. We're going to pull away any support. And that goes for boycotting companies and services as well.
I think it's important that we keep bringing it to their attention, like people do with Gerard Batten on Twitter. They always say, what are you doing about the demographics? What are you doing about the demographics? So it's definitely important to bring it to their attention. And like you say, I don't think we're going to fix this by voting anyway. So I think we should be focusing on meta politics and getting our ideas into the mainstream and, you know, getting people learning about them. And Fraser Anning, as you mentioned, is absolutely fantastic. So I'm sure many people in your audience will be aware of who he is. But he openly talks about white demographics, and it's just so beautiful to hear a politician stick up for his people. So you guys have probably all heard of him. He's the guy that got egged on the back of the head after the New Zealand terror attack, because he said that even though Muslims are the victims this time, they're usually the perpetrators, and the real reason behind the terror attack was multiculturalism and people fighting out against multiculturalism. So people were like, you didn't condemn the killer and you're sticking up for the killer, which he didn't, and he did condemn the killer. But he, he's very brave. He is saying a lot of very good things about the struggles that we're facing. He's talking about white demographics. He's talking about central banking and banking control over his country, and saying that they need nationalised banks so that there's no foreign interference. He speaks out against communism. He speaks out about the white farmers in South Africa. He's pro-life, anti-abortion. He's pro-gun. Just everything. He just ticks every single box, and they're making him out to be a villain. So he's currently elected as a senator in Australia, but he's up for re-election on the 18th of May. So at Defend Europa, we're completely getting behind him. We're writing articles about him, making videos about him, doing streams about him, making graphics about him for people to share on social media. And go and follow him on Twitter, Senator Fraser Anning. If you just look at my Twitter, I retweet him all the time. But he's just calling people out on such crap. Like, for example, do you guys know the Imam of Peace, who's like a Zio-controlled civic nationalist? He was tweeting saying that he doesn't support Fraser Anning because Fraser Anning supports real Australians. And he was like, who's real Australians? Anyone can be Australian. It's just about values. And Fraser Anning replied to him and said, well, actually, no, it isn't just about values. If I moved to Japan, would I be Japanese? That's what he said. And these are the things that we say. So he's very base, he's very good, and hopefully he'll get re-elected because he's doing fantastic work. But even if he doesn't, we need to use him at the moment to get our ideas in front of a mainstream audience, and we need to support him as well, because there are lots of idiots underneath his tweets just going on about the egg incident all the time. Not sure if you guys saw the video, but when he was smacked on the back of the head with an egg, he turned around and punched the guy in the face. So he's just a proper bloke as well, you know, like not some sort of pansy or something. He turned around and punched him. So he gets all these comments underneath his video just saying egg, egg, egg. So we always make sure that we go and give him some support underneath his tweets and his Facebook posts and stuff, so he knows that he has that support. But yeah, he's totally our guy. He's probably the best politician I can think of at the moment.
I was going to say he has to be one of the based, if not the most based politician on the national stage right now, apart from guys like Salvini and Orban. Yeah, I put the link in the chat to his Twitter. He's _Fraser, that's FRASER, at FRASER _Anning, ANNING, and link in the chat. So yeah, we need a lot more Fraser Annings, but good to see that he's doing that. And do you think, just to my last question, if someone does not acknowledge people of European descent, does not acknowledge white people, do you say just don't vote for them? Do you think that's going to do trouble in the long run, or do you think it's such a farce at this point, we might as well use that as another point of leverage?
I don't know. I mean, we should definitely threaten that we don't support them unless they talk out about white well-being. We should definitely threaten that. But I don't know what good it would do by just. I mean, we're not going to fix it through democracy anyway, are we? So does it really matter who we vote for? I don't think so. I'm not sure what good it will do by not voting for them. I mean, if there was an election today, I would go and vote for UKIP, even though I don't think that we're going to fix this through democracy, and even though I don't think that UKIP are good, I would still go and vote for them. But I'd still tell Gerard Batten on Twitter all the time, you need to be talking about this, you need to be talking about this. So I definitely think it's worth at least threatening that you're not going to do it.
Well, we'll move towards our outro now. I only got about 8 people, more or less. We'll say 10 if I missed a couple that I tallied that said that they were in Europe. So I guess Jason and I will just do streams at 3 a.m. your time. Somehow I don't believe we had a nice turnout today, and we do need to know how many of you are over in Europe. It does help us schedule these. I mean, we do them when we can, but we love that this is an international show, that we have a big European audience. So I'll give you one more chance. If people in Europe, can you hit 1? Don't say where you are. It's just easier for me to just see the number 1 as I scroll down. So as we're wrapping up, hit the number 1. We want to see how many people are in Europe. But with that said, we're going to start wrapping. So Jason.
Well, good sir, it's been a fantastic show as always. Very exciting to have Laura on. We're going to have her back more often. It's been a little while since her last appearance. She's become a very busy lady, and we're excited about that. We're excited about her success. So if you could, Laura, please tell everyone what you're working on, what you will be working on, where people can find you, and what's coming up for you.
Yeah, so people can find me at Defend Europa. I'm an editor and a writer there. If you follow Defend Europa on Twitter and bookmark our website, you'll get lots of news and opinion articles about what's really going on in Europe. I also have my own YouTube channel, just Laura Towler, and I post videos maybe 1 a week about politics, culture, history, psychology from an ethno-nationalist perspective. I'm kind of at a crossroads where I don't know where to go. I want to stay on YouTube, and I kind of feel like I've had quite a few warnings from YouTube about my content, so I maybe need to reel it back in a little bit. So I might post some more like normie friendly stuff for a while so that I can keep my channel. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what I can get away with.
Jason has some ideas for cat videos where we're like tickling cats, but as we're tickling cats, we're making talking points about white well-being.
Yeah. I could make like a makeup video, but like talk about like demographics or something. I don't know.
That would go over very well. Yeah.
I need to try and trick the algorithm because I do feel like I'm hanging on by the skin of my teeth and they're about to ban me at any moment. So I need to work it out. I need to figure out how to do it best. But yeah, check out my YouTube channel if you're not already subscribed. And thank you to everybody who shares my videos and comments. I have a video going up on Saturday morning called Who the English Are. And it's an honest video about who the English are. So none of this my values and, you know, play cricket and your English crap. It's about our ethnic origins and our identity. And that's it really. And I just want to say thank you to everybody in the audience, and thank you to Jason and Jared. It's always a lovely show to be a guest on. So yeah, thanks guys.
It's our deep pleasure. Jared, what about you? What are you working on? Where can people find you?
Oh, well, you should know thegreatorder.com is where everything goes through for me. I organize the videos and the streams in a way that makes it easy to navigate. So hopefully that helps. And you'll see other things that I do there as well, other content that I offer, and ways to support, ways to be in touch, all the social media. I encourage people to sign up for the mailing list as well, because if social media went away, at least I'd have a way to contact you. So yeah, we're doing all kinds of things, and I don't want to say too much before things happen, but yeah, a lot of fun things planned. I would encourage people to go check out that collaboration Jason and I did, as I mentioned, Spring Incantation. If you haven't seen it, it's a very short video. It's a totally different kind of approach, using the power of the word, power of intention. Jason and I speaking in nature, celebrating our people, marking this spring, and all of the positive things that we feel going on, even amidst all the craziness in the world, those little seeds sprouting of white well-being and reclaiming the West. But other than that, yeah, thank you. It's always great to talk to Laura. Please do go check out her YouTube channel, some of the streams that she started doing, conversations with other content creators. She's really, besides from her work on Defend Europa, is now a full-on YouTuber, and it's great to see. And we're having a lot of fun here with Laura and all of our other friends as we're doing all this together. But I'll turn it over to Jason to bring us out, and we will all see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, good sir, and thank you both. It is an elephantin pleasure to be able to serve with both of my co-hosts here, Jared and Laura. If you have not subscribed to their channels, please do so. If you are able to financially support them, please do so as well. Another big message here is Jared's shirts are available on his website, which are the Great Order.
Right, thank you. I didn't ask him to do that, folks.
No, but I did want to show it off. It's a great shirt, and we should see more of them out on the streets. So I want to thank you all for being here today. Everybody who commented in the chat, everybody who listens now live and or in replay, thank you all. Thank you all for posing questions. A big thank you to everyone who super chatted during the course of the show. Every cent is put to the cause of white well-being. I want to give some salutes to, I saw Runaway Susie out in the chat. I saw Vanilla out in the chat as well. High Speed Drifter was there. Great to see all of you in the chat today. We had some late super chats. The real Jack Ryan super chatting with $1.99. Thank you very much for that. Writing, how do we organize outside of politics? We'll have to save that question for the next show. Thank you very much for that, though. And Roy Danton back again. A definite hero among our heroes. Super chatting with $24.99. Quote, you cannot atone for a grievance never committed. 2019 is indeed the year of the first Western sunrise. Hail victory. Thank you very much for that, Roy. Hail victory indeed. This is our destiny. The anti-whites hold today, but we hold tomorrow, and we look forward to seeing you all again next time.